Good afternoon and welcome to the Sam Lacrosse Show. Happy Monday. America has had, to put it mildly, a very rough past month. School children at a Catholic school in Minnesota, for example, were murdered while praying. Online division, particularly on the subject of Israel, has reached a fever pitch. The greatest Christian evangelist and model for young men in America, Charlie Kirk, was assassinated and martyred in front of the entire world on camera. We didn't even get to collectively mourn for the 24th anniversary of the September 11th attacks, something we should always come together to do as Americans. So in times like these, it's wise to ask, what causes this? Many people will and have blamed many things. It's political polarization, Biden, Trump, rah. Really? The church has gone woke. Why don't more pastors speak up? Rah. It's the mental health of our young people. We need more SSRIs or cry on the couch therapy sessions or less police. Rah. It's parenting or children or social media, the public school system. Rah. Are all of these things a factor? Maybe. Are all of them issues we should be looking into and dealing with? Yes. But are all of them at root the answer? No. Jesus says in the Bible that you should judge a tree by the fruit that it bears. If it bears fruit, and that fruit both is plentiful in sustenance and taste, then the roots of that tree are more than likely doing well. If it bears no fruit, or if the fruit tastes bitter, the roots of the tree are more than likely corrupted. This is what makes our modern political discourse so foolish and stupid. So many people are, both on the left and the right, mind you, completely co-opted into talking about the fruits of our societal tree, rather than the roots of our societal tree. They see something obvious sprout out of our culture and believe that it is what is causing our culture to go astray, rather than looking at what gave birth to that thing in the first place. Should we have discussions about things like our rapidly rising political temperature and what's causing it? 100%. Should we have discussions about how pastors, priests, and the pulpit broadly have compromised the doctrines of Christianity for people-pleasing fear of man-style presentation? I couldn't think of many things that are more important to address, to be frank. Should we address the rapidly declining mental health of our young people, or parenting tactics, or how children are brought up, or social media usage, or why the public school system sucks? Yes, 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 and wait for it, yes. But all of these discussions are useless without having the discussion underneath these discussions, ergo, the roots of the discussion. And as every person with a fifth grade education knows, the best question to get to the root of anything is the following. Why? Why is our political discourse getting more hostile? Why have churches gone apostate? Why is our young people's mental health so bad? Why does our public school system suck? These questions have not been answered adequately by hardly anyone. We're too busy getting mired in baseless, nonsensical discussions like how Donald Trump memeing Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries with mariachi music is racist, or how we need to quote-unquote love our neighbors takes precedent over quote-unquote loving God, or how we need to shove 1 billion pills down our kids' throats, or believe that yelling at school boards is going to somehow solve something. These conversations, the one we've been psyoped into participating into, all lead to the same place. Nowhere. Our politics is still a zero-sum game. Our churches are still floundering. Our kids are still getting psychologically gutted. Our schools still don't teach. Therefore, instead of entertaining these conversations, most of which are deliberately installed into our discourse to keep us distracted, we must have a new conversation, one that actually gets to the root of the problems that we all experience. There's been a lot of talk in our country, particularly since Charlie Kirk was assassinated, about quote-unquote unity. The people who are starting these conversations, mostly, are starting this conversation for one purpose: to shut up the people who think like Charlie Kirk. We, as Christian, conservative, value-driven people, need to quote-unquote tone down the rhetoric and quote-unquote turn the temperature down. Say the people that mostly agreed with all of the principles and values of the young man who shot Charlie Kirk in the neck and those who paid him to shoot Charlie Kirk in the neck believed in. This is a cultural false flag operation, a ruse, and a psyop. As J.D. Vance so eloquently put when he was hosting Charlie Kirk's show, there is no unity with people who believe that the normalized response to disagreement is assault, murder, and violence, as Charlie Kirk prophetically pointed out in a tweet about rising left-wing political violence. There is no unity with people who believe that saying words is akin to getting punched in the face. But on the other hand, what happens if unity is not reached at all? Well, we will get more incidents of what happened with Charlie Kirk. There will be more assassinations. There will be more school shootings. There will be more political violence. There will be more tyranny enforced on our most vulnerable, our children, our elderly, our poor. If some definition of unity is not reached in America, if we keep going down this pathway, our country will continue what it is doing now, tearing itself apart with blood and bullets paying for the tearing. This is obviously not a good solution. I personally have already seen too much of it. What signals to me and I believe to all who are observing the same thing, is something very, very alarming. The American social contract is fundamentally broken. The reason why America is descending into chaos is because the fundamental order that America is based on is corrupted, hollow, and rotted. And it has been for many years now. It has not been renewed. So therefore, a weakening structure can only bear so much weight until it snaps under the pressure. Just ask a bridge, for example. If America feels like it is snapping, that's not your imagination. It's because it's actually happening. The way this has been best described, as mentioned, is through a concept called social contract theory. A social contract, broadly speaking, is the relationship between the citizens of a country, both between the citizens themselves and those who rule those citizens. In other words, what does the political order of a society look like? What is acceptable in a society and what isn't? How should we treat each other and why should we treat each other that way? When you look at these questions at a base level, it's hard to come up with others that are more foundational to the success or failure of a nation. If a nation does not know how to govern itself, that nation will collapse in on itself. If a society does not establish norms, taboos, and punishments for their respective violations, then you have anarchy and instability. If citizens do not have base standards for how to treat one another, dehumanization and otherism are the rule, not the exception. When you look at nations that have succeeded throughout history and ones that have failed, there is no clearer line of demarcation than an established social contract. Even if it is deemed morally wrong in today's eyes, and many of them are, to be sure, that does not invalidate social contract theory. In fact, I would argue it validates it stronger than it otherwise would have before. If nations can thrive when there are open examples of things like authoritarianism, bigotry, dictatorship, slavery, and other things, but establish rules around those things make that country thrive in spite of those things, you know that social contracts matter perhaps more than anything else. And humans have always been aware about this, even if we didn't have a name for it. There are Buddhist texts from 2nd century India that outline it, for example. But the first person to put social contract theory in the spotlight was philosopher Thomas Hobbes in his masterwork Leviathan. In it, Hobbes argued that human nature was, quote, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, end quote. Only in, quote, is subjugating some of their, quote unquote, rights to a higher authority, i.e. the state, could a group of people thrive and become a successful culture. John Locke, in his book Second Treatise of Government, differed and evolved from Hobbes, saying that humans under a governing body would be, quote unquote, morally bound to ensure the well-being of their citizens. If they didn't, they would violate the social contract and thus become outsiders. The state would simply be a, quote unquote, neutral judge that would oversee the social contract. It's hard to understate just how important this differentiation was from Hobbes, who advocated for a quasi-tyrannical form of centralized state power. Locke, a devout Christian, drew this conclusion from the Bible, specifically in Romans 13, which argues that all government are God-ordained and that they, quote-unquote, must, quote-unquote, wield the sword to preserve social order. In 1762, the man who put a formal name to it was French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau in his book of the same name. However, Rousseau differed from Locke very seriously, mainly stating that the social contract came from the abolishment of the state, not the empowerment of the state by the citizenry. Rather, the centralized power should lie with the citizens against all forms of quote-unquote tyranny. In other words, mob rule. It didn't take long for the contrasting social contract theories of Locke and Rousseau to flesh themselves out. 13 years after Rousseau's book was released, the American Revolution kicked off. Shortly after that, the French Revolution kicked off. The results of both? America defeated the greatest global power the world has ever known, setting the stage for it to become the freest, most prosperous, and righteous nation in world history. The French Revolution resulted in the murder of tens of thousands, completely upending their social order, plunged their society into chaos and poverty, and empowered a man named Napoleon Bonaparte to quote-unquote save their civilization by establishing a military dictatorship. Once again, as Jesus said, you judge a tree by its fruits. The question of a social contract, of how we treat one another in a culture, is at the root of every quote-unquote political issue that has ever been discussed. That is because how we treat each other isn't a political issue. It's a spiritual issue, a theological issue, one that speaks to the soul, not one that can be defined and boxed in by what you think about the marginal tax rate or racial equity policies in nonprofit organizations. Any examination of real change in culture must start here, or it will end in the same place it always ends. Given this, think about the core of the wrongs that have been committed in America in the last month alone. Children have been murdered. A man was publicly executed for telling people what he thought about things. Our country was robbed of a rare moment of societal unity. These are very deep things that determine the fate and future of a nation and how it proceeds through tragedy. This is also why all the talks of quote-unquote unity right now, mostly coming from people who only want unity on their terms, by the way, cannot be taken seriously. Unity with what? Lunatics putting bullets in kids at an elementary school? People getting assassinated in front of 3,000 college students, all armed with video cameras? An abolishment of all rituals and societal norms? If we were to quote-unquote unify with that, we would only be unifying with one thing, and one thing only: destruction. Potentially the greatest film of my lifetime is The Dark Knight. Many people are under the impression that it's yet another Batman movie, a broy superhero popcorn flick. But that couldn't be further from the truth, actually. The reason why The Dark Knight holds as one of the best films in recent memory is that it speaks to social contract theory. What happens when society breaks down? What would otherwise quote-unquote good people do when forced with an impossible decision? How far will you go to preserve your ethics, your morals, and your values? The scene in the film that best defines this dynamic is the immortalized interrogation scene between Batman and the Joker. Allowing himself to be caught, the Joker, a psychopathic, anarchistic, valueless terrorist, is finally face-to-face with his foil, Batman, a principled, value-driven, and grounded hero. Finally getting to speak with him, the Joker exposes the core of his philosophy, one he is evangelizing through his destruction of Gotham City and the abolishment of all of its sacred cows. Quote, "The only sensible way to live in this world is without rules." End quote. It's the irony of this statement that makes it so devastating. Quote-unquote sensible is the last word you would use to describe a world quote-unquote without rules, at least to a rational person. But the key phrase isn't quote sensible. It's quote this world. This world. So the question then becomes, a world defined by what exactly? Well, in the Joker's case, he was trying to create a world that was defined by his worldview: fear, lawlessness, violence. This is an indictment of all Christian, conservative, value-driven people. When you look at the state of our world, particularly within the last month, you will see the Joker's statement made manifest. There are no three better words to describe September of 2025 than one that was defined by fear, lawlessness, and violence. The only sensible way to live in this world is without rules. As mentioned, that statement is correct. There have been many cultures throughout world history that have forged a successful social contract through malicious means. The theory is undefeated. When a social contract is established, a society survives. When one isn't, it dies. The key thing to understand isn't whether societies have an option to establish one or not, because they don't. Instead, it's deciding what type of social contract they want. In other words, in what type of society do you want to live in? What rules should be established? What are the norms and taboos that must be elevated? Therefore, it is my belief that to create a future in America that is going to last, one that is going to provide the same level of flourishing it once did, we must forge and reestablish a new American social contract. What is clear to me, and I believe to most Americans after the events of the past month, is that we need to bring back basic definitions and rules to the forefront. They must be discussed, hashed out, and agreed upon by all sensible people. If we don't, we will lose our country to the new social contract, the ones that enabled the murder of those children, the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and nearly everything else that has gone bad in America. The show is going to be dedicated to that new social contract, what it looks like, how it will be enforced, and the why behind it all. This is a bold task, to be certain, one that no man, and certainly not me, should have the power to wield. I believe what I'm going to flesh out today would drastically improve the direction of America for all Americans. It's by no means perfect, but it's better than what we have now. It's not much, but it's something. In Luke's gospel, Jesus Christ makes clear that he did not come down to earth to bring peace and unity. Rather, he came to bring a sword, to set father against son, mother against daughter, to destroy the most intimate relationships in one's life through the truth of the gospel. Jesus did not do this because he likes division. Quite the opposite, actually. Jesus did this because he knew that in order to have peace on earth, the truth must come first. The truth cannot be argued. It just is. Anyone who believes it cannot be welcome, or anyone who believes it can be, rather, cannot be welcome. What this means is simple. True unity can only come through initial division, from setting the boundaries and ground rules, through separating the wheat from the chaff. This is old hat for Americans. Our first societal contract was set forth in the Declaration of Independence, which set off a bloody, nearly decade-long conflict that put our new nation at existential risk. But yet we got through it. We went through the fire and got stronger as a result. We laid the foundations for a new social contract, which allowed America to achieve all it has achieved and weather all the storms that had become born against it. We couldn't have beaten the British without our social contract, nor we could have ended slavery, given women the right to vote, beat the Axis powers, and given freedom to hundreds of millions of people. A reestablishment and renewal of the American social contract is the only way forward for all who really want to see our country improve. A country goes as far as its values allow it to go. Whether those values are good or bad is up to the people who establish them. There is no such thing as a valueless society. Value is in the eye of the beholder. A society's values are placed in the eyes of the collective citizenry. When the eyes of a country's citizens are set on the proper things, the permanent things, as America once was, that country has a future. If they don't, that country has a deadline. It's up to us, as always, of which path we choose. Okay, so America's social contract, there are going to be a lot of things that we could say about this. And I think that there are a lot of things to say about it. Obviously, I'm doing an episode on it. But I think I got it down to 4. And I'm going to be breaking down the 4 elements of what I believe America's social contract really needs to emphasize going forward in order to heal, to come together, to get unity after we divide up the people that do not believe in this and the people that believe in this. So if I was king of America, I'm waving a magic wand, this is what I would say everyone basically ascribes to. I believe this is established in biblical principles, in the founding documents, in all the good things that have come out of America, of which there are so many of them. But the first one, I believe, the first element of our social contract that we're going to be examining is selfless individualism. I'm calling this selfless individualism. So what this means is, in my view, individualism for the good of other people. So America is commonly described, I believe too commonly described, as a rugged individualist country. And I would argue that now there's an argument for that. There's an argument for that now. But there is not an argument for that in the founding of America, at least in my view, because America was not founded on rugged individualism, actually. We believed in the individual. We believed in empowering the individual. The Declaration of Independence opens up with basically the establishment of that, right? We the people, certain inalienable rights for every person that is born into the society. They have all of these rights. We're going to establish that. We're going to put that forward. And so people have taken that. This is, I think, a fault of real, right-wing types, libertarian types, conservative types, and said, like, individualism is all that matters, and your choices are all that matter. And I agree that your choices, there is no greater factor in the success or failure of your life than your choices. If you make bad choices, you will most likely end up living a bad life. If you make good choices, you will end up living a good life. And so it's funny, I wrote a whole book on this. It's behind me right now, Spectrum of Lies, out now, by the way, 4-time #1 Amazon bestseller. And so this was a really big portion of my book, and I'm not going to rehash the entire book. Later on, read the book if you want to. I encourage it, not only because I get crappy royalties from Amazon, but I think it's an actually good book and it can help. But really, the core argument of the book is that it's this inversion of individualism. And so when people say that America is this kind of like dog eat dog, rugged individualist, I'm going to beat everybody else over the head to get mine, all that kind of stuff. There have been people that have done that. Like, there are great movies about that. Like, I think, There Will Be Blood is a great movie like that. Like, all of these, Wolf of Wall Street is like that, where this kind of titanic force of a character kind of imposes his will on everybody else and subjugates people and everything like that. And America certainly can enable that, but that was not the design of America. That was not the design of the founders. It's not a rugged individualism. It's a selfless individualism. And so the best way that this was described to me in my research of all of this is that individualism is broken into really 2 categories. It's broken into a utilitarian individualism and an expressive individualism. Utilitarian individualism, which we'll get to in a second, was first. That was what the founders had in mind. And gradually, we have evolved from that into expressive individualism, which is why all of the issues we are coming into now, political polarization, racialism, idolatry, all these other type of things. This is all a manifest of an expressive individualist society. And again, I write about this extensively in Spectrum of Lies, specifically when it goes to the autism epidemic and everything like that. I talk about that in, I believe, episode like 6, I think, or something like that. It's way back in the way. If you want to look it up, just go ahead and look it up back there. So the core of all of this really breaks down into one guy and one guy's theory on this. So that guy is Alexis de Tocqueville. De Tocqueville was actually a French citizen who came over to America after the French Revolution. It's early 1800s, so early 19th century. And he came over to study the prison system in America. I think he was commissioned by the government to come over here. He was a sociologist, and he wanted to see how America was doing their prison system for some reason. I actually don't know why. But he came over to America, again, by boat, no really means of transportation, and he wanted to really observe the culture. He was a cultural commentator, really, before cultural commentating was a thing. And so he traveled all around to the different states and saw how America operated and everything else. And he ended up writing a very famous book, which is, I think, maybe the defining book in the birth of modern sociology, which is called Democracy in America. It's a fascinating book, written, I believe, in 1815, if I'm getting that year right. And so it's still read to this day. It's still taught to this day because of de Tocqueville's observations about America and how different it was from Europe. And so what de Tocqueville's most potent observation about American society was, particularly in differentiation from European society, was that America put much more focus on the individual than Europe did, which allowed for them to break out of the trends that had defined Europe, largely things like upward mobility and classism. Because if you looked at the way that European countries were structured politically, or in terms of how a culture meshed together, it was really divided by class. Like if you go over to Britain still, people use the word posh to describe people. Chris Williamson talked about this with Douglas Murray, I think, once, and he's talked about it with other people who are British. Like when they go back and, they hate on Chris or whatever for chasing his dreams and moving to America and, starting one of the biggest podcasts in the world, they call him posh. Like, oh, you think you're better than us because you moved to America and you make money now and you have this big platform and everything like that. So it's not like, and this is a particularly European issue, because Americans, I think, unless they're really resentful, and this has obviously increased in the last couple of years, but Americans largely, like when someone does well in something, like when someone gets a promotion, when your friend gets when they come into some money, when they close a big deal, we're more than likely like, heck yeah, man, like that's awesome, like good for you. But that is not the case everywhere, particularly in Europe. Europe was very envious about that. That's that kind of their core sin of the way that culture is divided. For us, it's more of a race-based thing just because of slavery and Jim Crow and a bunch of things. America has a lot of lingering race problems because that was our cardinal sin. In Europe, it was more the class system with feudal Europe, with the Middle Ages, with monarchies, with empire, all that kind of stuff. And so this is a really big deal. And it's largely why, by the way, that Europeans have regressed like they have in the modern era, because they do not, to my point earlier, they don't encourage things like innovation, for example. They don't fund their smart people. They have basically rested on their laurels and say, our institutions that have carried us throughout the past 1,000 years in terms of, the church, some of our university systems, our economies, our relationships with one another, that's fine, and we don't need to innovate, we don't need to adapt, we don't need to mobilize, we don't need to kind of go forward from that. And that is why that Europe has fallen behind, and why their birth rates are declining, and why their economy is a mess, and why Britain wanted to exit the European Union and did exit the European Union, and why their currencies are failing, and why you're getting all of this tyrannical, centralized control over things like universal digital ID or climate regulations or things like that. They have outsourced all of that to other countries, and they have kind of just clamped down and been very protectionist about what they're, quote unquote, trying to do from their political class. And at the same time, they've let tens of millions of third world migrants into the country, which are running rampant and destroying the civilization and everything like that. So that's a whole separate issue. But where we have gone wrong is Americans, is that we have forgotten the utilitarian version of our individualism. We have traded that for an expressive individualism. So for us as Americans in the current era, it's all about us. There is no need for community. There's no need for family. There's no need for knowing your neighbors. There's no need for supporting local small business. There's no need for any of that anymore. And I want to preface this by saying Americans have achieved great things, and we should allow for that. We should aspire people to do things like build rocket ships and start companies and go out on a limb and create great works of art and all that kind of stuff. And we need to keep that going. That is a good thing, that America is entrepreneurial and innovative, and we push people to do these amazing things. And there's this remarkable American spirit about the drive to accomplish things and achieve things and push the boundaries and everything else. But we also need to enforce at a societal level that we must achieve in order to support not ourselves, but our communities. If we just achieve, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. said this once. I thought it was a wonderfully wise point. He said that, our goal here on earth should not just be, making a big pile for ourselves and whoever dies at the end with the most stuff wins. And really, that's the way I know that's the way my generation believes. I got to get mine. I got to do this. I got to go out and prove myself and make all this money and do this and whatever. But what we lose in that is what we need to accrue resources for. And I'm not against accruing resources at all. Monetary resources, networking resources, all those things. I'm totally for that. But we also need to enforce that, we push yourself, men especially, push yourself, provide, achieve, do great things, but do those things with a purpose on the back end, other than your own hedonism, your own narcissism, and your own selfishness. Do it to help your friends. Do it to give to your church, your synagogue, your mosque. Do it to help your family, provide for your family, have a billion babies. Support a social institution, a political institution around a social institution. Donate to a charity around you or something else. Because if money is not used for the empowerment of a community, if it is not, there's this great economic principle about the velocity of money. So though for those who don't know, the velocity of money is a principle in economics that basically measures the amount of times a dollar is exchanged within a community of people. And unsurprisingly, the higher the velocity of money, i.e. the more often dollars are exchanged inside of a various community, whether that's a demographic group, whether that's a geography, whether that's whatever, the more well-off the community is. Why? Because they support one another. They are all knitting together the social fabric. Because if you just kind of hoard your stuff and you put it in your place and you basically say, I'm going to make myself a big pile and a big castle over here and everything else is just going to go to hell, then we get what we currently have now. Gutted communities, churches that don't have financial backing, families that are broken, social institutions that have no support across anything, especially in communities like Austin, where I live. And I live outside the city now. I wanted to get very far away from the city, to be honest. I love Austin. I don't want to leave Austin. But I live in a suburb for a reason. I live in a very working middle-class neighborhood, which is where I'm filming this right now. Why? Because I'm around people that support local businesses. I'm around people that have normal jobs. I'm not stuffed in a shoebox in the middle of a city where I don't know anybody around me, where there's no children, where there's no life, where there's no family. Because you can't have those things in an apartment building. You just can't. And we've lied to people about all of that stuff for a very, very long time. And I think that it's a real sin, honestly. And I think we need to really, take a look at that as a culture, but that's beside the point. And so the point of all of this really is that money can only get you so far if you have no one to give back and share it with. If you don't have a family, if you don't have a community, if you don't have a church, if you don't have a group of friends, if you don't have neighbors that you interact with. And I remember I wrote a series of articles about this. Gosh, this is probably like 2 years ago now, about globalism, when I really looked into why globalism was so destructive. And this is largely, this mindset of this, I got to get mine, I got to chase a bag mentality is what has led to globalization, other things that have rotted out the core of American communities. It is our selfishness in our individualism that has allowed for that. Because if we truly cared about the success of the social fabric, then we wouldn't have put up with that. We just wouldn't have. And so what this has done is that these things have rotted out the core of American communities. And to fix the country broadly, we need to turn back to our most valuable resource, which is our people. We need to help people again in America. It's not, I need to get money. It's not, I need to do all of these X, Y, and Z things. It is not basically, we have forgotten that people are the things that, Donald Trump said this in an ad that was produced by Nicole Shanahan. It made me, I still watch it. It's the best political ad I've ever seen, where Trump says it's the people that make America great. And that's true with any country. It's not just true of America, and I love Americans. But when you see, and when you go to another country, and I've been fortunate enough to go to Britain, I've gone to Italy, I've gone to, I've gone to places in the Caribbean, gone to Canada, a bunch of other places. When you see people that are really proud of their nation, you shouldn't take offense to that. This is what makes nationalism so great, is that I really enjoy that you love being Indonesian, or you love being Haitian, or you love being American. I really enjoy that, and we should encourage that. So the only way to encourage that, however, is by knowing that people and using our individual drive to help other people to create a communitarian culture. That's what they call this. Communitarianism is the fancy word for it. That's the only way that we would establish a social fabric. And I can't think of many more things that are more important than establishing a social fabric. And that's very, very important. And so that is, if I were king of America, that would be element of the social contract number one. So in light of recent events, number two in the new social contract of America that we need to revive is a marketplace of ideas without threat of violence. So particularly in the aftermath of the Catholic school shooting and the Charlie Kirk assassination, there is we need to get this fixed, immediately, yesterday. We need to get this fixed. And so the reason why all outbreaks of violence happen, and I'm talking war, I'm talking a fight on the street between two drunk people, I'm talking about, a lot of different things. And I've studied a lot, too much, honestly, about violence and what causes it, war and what causes it, fighting and what causes it. And some of it is spiritual. I think at the root of everything, like I mentioned earlier, is spiritual. It's a demonic impulse, especially when it comes to mass things like war and things like that. There is a violent demonic spirit happening there. But on the surface level, and I think the reason that leads down to the demonic having an opportunity to break out and enforce itself inside of culture, whether it's American culture, what's going on in Gaza or the Ukraine or wherever, the reason why outbreaks of violence happen is through a breakdown of communication. Led Zeppelin got this right in the 60s. When people cannot talk to each other, when people feel like they cannot express themselves properly, when people feel unheard, that is the biggest thing. You're not hearing me. You're shouting. I'm shouting into the void, and no one is hearing me. I'm crying for help. I'm raising my hand. I'm doing whatever, and people just don't care, or they feel like they don't care, because feeling is what matters here. And I'm not saying that feeling should be the dominant way you think about these things. It probably shouldn't. But what happens to humans is a human nature thing, not a specific thing in general. So what happens when people feel unheard, particularly a group of people at scale, is they resort to radicalism to be heard. So, for example, there were many instances that ramped up of police brutality, of black men, black women getting assaulted, getting killed by police, leading up to May of 2020 when George Floyd was killed and when George Floyd died. And it wasn't so much, I think, that George Floyd died in a very viral way and that it went crazy on social media and you had a bunch of these other things. You had a bunch of people who had been radicalized by saying, hey, we need to talk about policing in America. We need to talk about this or that or whatever. I'm not saying this is right or wrong. That's just not a comment on this at all. But what they heard was that, hey, you don't care about us. And now this racist, quote, again, this is not my opinion, this is what a lot of people thought. This racist police officer who bent his knee on this guy's neck, and guy's shouting he can't breathe, and he dies in the middle of the street when being arrested. I'm sorry, I'm going to throw a brick through the window of a muffin shop. I'm going to take a Molotov cocktail to the Chevy Tahoe that's on my street. And so, and this is everything in regards to violence. January 6th was like this. School shootings are like this. The assassination of Charlie Kirk is like this. I do not feel heard, and you are not listening to me, so I'm going to resort to a radical thing to say, hey, do you hear me now? Are you listening to me now? There is a reason why the shooter who shot Charlie Kirk wrote, catch this fascist on the bullet or the shell of the bullet that killed Charlie. You are not hearing me. You are oppressing me. So therefore, right or wrong, that is what he thought. So therefore, I'm going to write it on a bullet and I'm going to put it through Charlie's neck. That's what he thought. And again, I'm not saying this is right or wrong. All violence is wrong. All violence is wrong, unless it is in self-defense. All violence is wrong, period. I don't care what side of the political aisle you're on. I don't care what religion you are. Violence is wrong. It's wrong. And we have lost that clearly in our culture now. But on the same side of this, speech is not violence. Charlie said comments about transgenderism and gender and women and men and all those type of things. So just because the shooter that killed Charlie, that assassinated him, that martyred him on live TV and social media, was offended by things that Charlie said, that does not mean that it is acceptable to write, catch this fascist on a bullet and put it through Charlie's neck. It's not okay that even though you might be very angry about a viral video of a black man getting killed by police, that it is okay to take a Molotov cocktail and throw it into a Chevy Tahoe. It is not okay that you believe that the government or the left stole the election and you can run into the Capitol building, even though I think a lot of that was a psyop. I covered that a couple weeks ago. But you can assault a police officer, that you can do whatever, you can protest, whatever. But it does not mean that you can be violent over that. Too bad, so sad, grow up. Whatever the case might be, violence is not okay. And we've lost that in our country, which is why this stupid attorney general that we have. I sound like my dad. My dad says that when he's watching the Browns. Geez, I'm turning into my father. But anyway, it is what makes that clip that everyone is now seeing of Pam Bondi, our dumb attorney general, who should have been fired 6 months ago after the Epstein thing. So Pam Bondi goes on Katie Miller's podcast. So she's Stephen Miller's wife. I have no idea what Katie Miller does, actually, but she has a podcast, apparently. She's had J.D. Vance on. She's interviewing people in the administration. She's had, and she just had Pam Bondi on, I believe, right after Charlie got shot. And so Pam Bondi is the top law enforcement individual in the United States of America. She is the attorney general. There is no one that is above her. She oversees the FBI. She oversees all federal law enforcement, all the justice system. It is all under her. So when the top law enforcement official in the United States of America, the one who is the chief in the federal government, who is, Jesse Kelly put it this way, the attorney general was Donald Trump's most important pick by far, and I couldn't agree more with that, which is why Matt Gaetz getting pulled was such an abomination, because we have Pam Bondi now, who is so weak and so incompetent and so stupid and so spineless. And I don't even mean to be mean to Pam Bondi, but it's like, when is this going to stop? When is this going to stop? So I'm not even getting to my point. I'm getting angry now. So she goes on Katie Miller's show, and she talks about how they need to clamp down on quote unquote hate speech in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's assassination. And me and the rest of the people who were basically on the left-wing tyranny side of this for a while were like, huh? What? Hate speech? What? There's no such thing as hate speech. There's no such thing as hate speech. And by the way, the thing that made this, I think, not only just plain wrong and unconstitutional and immoral, but also insulting, was that her justification for this was that all of the people that were gloating and putting on social media in the aftermath of Charlie's assassination about, oh my God, I'm so glad that, Charlie got shot. I'm glad that Charlie Kirk was murdered, whatever. And her justification was that those people do not have the right to voice that opinion, that they're glad that Charlie Kirk was murdered. And I have a sense, and I don't obviously know this, but I have a sense that when Charlie Kirk saw that from heaven, he would have hated that. He was like, oh no, I don't want that. I don't want people to not be able to talk and voice their opinions on social media because you think that their speech is not acceptable. Because that's what any sensible person does. It is the opposite, by the way, of what Charlie Kirk stood for. Hate speech does not exist because words at the end of the day are just words. They do not have any violent associations with them at all. Words are words. Words are not violence. Feelings are not violence. How someone acts towards you, unless it is in a violent way, it is not violence. And so feeding this back into the initial point, if people feel that they cannot express themselves because of idiots like Pam Bondi, the top law enforcement official in the United States federal government, saying that, hey, some people cannot express themselves because I don't like what they have to say about Charlie Kirk getting shot, we will get violence. We will get more violence than we have. Because when people feel like they are being unheard, they will rise up and they will target institutions of who they believe they feel are, quote unquote, oppressing them. Which is why, again, we get BLM, we get January 6th, we get Charlie Kirk getting shot, we get these children getting blown away in schools. The root cause of all of them is the exact same thing. People feel like they're being ignored, so they take matters into their own hands and say, I'm going to make you hear me. With a bullet, with a Molotov cocktail, with a rock, with a brick, with whatever, with a fist, with a gun, with a knife. And especially when you have massive movements of aggrieved people that feel like they cannot be heard, it's not good. Again, this is what leads to massive outbreaks of violence, mob culture, mob rule. And so, but, I want to throw in another but here. We cannot let speech go without consequence. So this is why the whole thing about the whole Jimmy Kimmel thing was so stupid, because people were saying, oh, it's cancel culture. No, it's not. Just because, so like, for example, I was taught, this is not applied, by the way, but I was told by my parents, who probably didn't know any better, and I know they didn't know any better because they wouldn't tell me something that's untrue, but my parents told me, and what a lot of parents told their entire generation, was that you better clean up your social media. Company's going to see that. Hey, you better watch it. You better watch what you put out there. Don't, take a picture of yourself flipping off the camera. Don't put nude pictures out there. Don't do this, that, or whatever. And you shouldn't do that. You should not do that. But if you do that, if you say that I am, like there was a viral video of this one woman who was videotaped saying that she was very glad that Charlie Kirk got shot. I'm dancing on his grave, whatever the woman said. And she was expelled by her school from that. And the lefties were all like, oh my God, cancel culture. No. You are responsible for your speech. What you say matters. What you say has consequence. Anything that I put on my social media, anything that I say on this show, can and will be used against you in the court of law. That's what the Miranda rights are for. When you get arrested, and hopefully no one is getting arrested, but when you get arrested and they say anything you say can and will be used against you, that is not just for getting arrested. That is for your life, For example, if you say to your wife, I hate you, and I've always hated you for our entire marriage, and she serves you divorce papers the next day, you cannot say, oh my, what do you mean you're divorcing me? There are consequences for what you have to say, and we must expose bad values. This is why Pam Bondi is so wrong about this and why Charlie Kirk is appalled by this right now, I guarantee you. So we must expose bad values and harmful ideas by not shutting down speech, by allowing speech to continue, by allowing people to talk. And if people step over the line and commit violence, we must shame it and quash it immediately, no matter where it comes from. I don't care if it's right wing. I don't care if it's left wing. Violence is not acceptable, but all speech is acceptable. Speech is speech. Words are words. Words are not violence. Violence is violence. Period. Point blank. Plain and simple. So that's social contract element number 2. A marketplace of ideas without the threat of violence. All right, so social contract element number 3. Children are off limits. No more interfering with the kids. At all. At all. And I think this is potentially the most alarming element of our society right now, is how radically our positions on children have changed. Because there is Robbie Starbuck, he made a movie called The War on Children a couple of years ago. It's a great movie. I recommend everyone watch it. So children have come under assault recently, which is, I can't think of anything more shameful that we all need to take responsibility for. Whether, and God help you if you ever harmed a child in any way, but as a culture, we have not protected our children at all. We have not protected our kids, which is why our kids are running around and doing all these crazy things and believing these crazy things, and they're so depressed and anxious and all these things. Jonathan Haidt wrote a great book about this called The Anxious Generation, because we have not protected our children properly. I'm not saying to coddle children, but we need to protect children by being off limits from the malicious forces that are trying to help them. And it is a shameful thing that has gotten to this point that this needs to be a talking point at all, because children are innocent. They are innocent, and we need to treat them as such. Because if we do not protect our most innocent and sacred part of our society, which is, by the way, our kids, if our kids aren't the most innocent and sacred part of our society, I don't know what is. But if we do not protect those parts of our society, then we have no rules. We can just do whatever we want all the time. So this is a values problem, and we need to value our children far more than we're valuing our children, because in any values-related discussion, if we claim to hold something as sacred, hold it as high value, and you do nothing to protect it, you do nothing to keep it as elevated, to keep it sanctified, we are negligent as a society, and we should be deeply ashamed of that. We should be deeply ashamed of the way that our children have come under assault, that our kids have come under assault. The fact that we've allowed it to get this far, the fact that this is going on at all, the fact that we have allowed pornography in schools, the fact that pornography is not banned in this country, the fact that we have, again, drag queen story hour, we don't have armed guards at schools. This is bananas for the world that we live in right now. This is crazy. And the fact that we do not have more protection for our kids, that our kids are just going into this world right now, into public schools where they're getting all this nonsense shoved down their throat, where, just give them a phone at 7 years old and have them browse the internet. Crazy. It's just nuts. And it needs to end now. It needs to end yesterday, but it needs to end now. And this is, by the way, another area we cannot compromise on. We cannot, there is no compromise when it comes to our kids, when it comes to children, at all. And again, I want to be very careful with how I phrase this. Our kids should not be coddled and sheltered. That is no Oedipal mother syndrome, no you're perfect just the way you are, no, X, Y, and Z, whatever. And that is also, I think, the sin of probably the millennial generation in many ways. They were coddled. They were told that they can be, and I've gone to bat defending millennials for a very long time now about how they were told just so many lies about follow your dreams and chase this and participation trophies and everything like that. And look how that turned out. The people, again, the purple hair people that throw a brick through a bake shop, in a black-owned bake shop, probably, by the way. But that's neither here nor there. And so, but they cannot be totally thrown to the wolves either. Like that's both are abusive. Because if you protect your kid from everything and then you throw them out into the world, that's abusive. But if you take an innocent child and you say, hey, here's a phone at 7 years old, here's a public school, teacher take care of you for 8 hours, I'm not going to ask questions. That is throwing them to the wolves in the same type of a way. And either the coddling end or the I'm just not going to care about this end is a horrible, 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 horrible scenario for anyone who really values kids, who really values children. And because children are the future of our country. They are the future of America. And we need to understand that. And we need to drill that into our heads. And we need to take the ownership on as the adults in the room. I don't have kids, but I know a lot of people that have kids. I'm responsible for kids in a lot of settings in my life. And we need to, and I love kids. I want like a million of them, like I said earlier. But if we need to take the responsibility, the posture, the ownership onto our heads as the adults in the room to say that if we are not setting our kids up for success in all areas of life, spiritually, emotionally, physically, whatever, in different scenarios, boys and girls, same for either of them, the question must be raised, and this is the tough question: do we love our kids if we don't do this? Do you love your children if you do not set them up for success by not coddling them and not throwing them to the wolves, by being active, other words, in your child's life? And as a culture, we need to answer this question, because right now I would say that we don't. And it pains me to say that, but I don't think we really love our kids because of how, again, Jesus said, you judge a tree by the fruit it produces. The fruit of our children right now is largely rotted out and poisoned. And that is because of us, because of the adults in the room that we have allowed it to get this far. And so I am militant on this issue. We need to get to a point in society. This is why I want to make this such a big part of our social contract. Any threat that poses a harm to children, social media companies, helicopter parents, whatever the case might be. I want to hit both sides of the argument here. Any threat that poses a harm to kids must be scorned, dealt with, and punished to the highest possible level. We need to protect our kids because there is a war against our kids right now. This is coming down from top down, by the way. Politics, legislation, culture, Hollywood. And what does this look like? We talked about some of it. With the normalization of the sexualization of children. LGBTQ silent P, that's coming, by the way. Just ask the California State Legislature. The use of children for political purposes. Social media stuff. It's got to stop. It's got to stop. It's gross. It's disgusting. It's abusive. And it needs to stop. Stay away from our kids. Our kids are off limits. If you cross that limit, if you cross that boundary, there will be punishment. And there should be at the government level, there should be at the individual level. If you see it in your life, you need to punish the people that are doing this to kids. Kids are innocent. Kids are the most sacred thing that we have in our society. Our children are the most sacred thing we have in our society. So that is social contract element number 3. Stay away from our kids. Okay, so following our kids, the 4th element of our social contract, there are 4 of them. So the 4th element of our social contract, the new American social contract that needs to be renewed, is that the highest good in society is the flourishing of the nuclear family. Again, if I were king of this country, if I were to fix one thing about America, it would be to elevate the flourishing of the family, of the nuclear 2-parent heterosexual family, as the number 1 priority of every person important to societal structure, politics, culture, whatever. Because the family, as it has been rightly pointed out by people, has been under assault for a very long time. With no-fault divorce, with bankruptcy, with financial reasons, with custody battles, with inability of young people to get financially stable and start families and buy homes and everything else like that, with school costs, with college costs, with everything like that. So what most people view as problems in the world, so we talked about a lot of this earlier, whether it's like mental health or dating or finances or affordability or college or education or obesity. What that can be traced to is a problem with the family, a brokenness in the family, an inability for a healthy family to produce healthy kids and healthy effects on the broader community. Because the family is the greatest. Jason Whitlock had this great quote, "The nuclear family is undefeated when done right." And he's right about that. Vivek Ramaswamy said, "The nuclear family is the most important governmental institution, a governing body in the history of the world." He's absolutely right about that. And the fact that the family has been so degraded and we'd have so few people talking about this. Like, thank God for people like the 2 I just mentioned, even though Jason's made a lot of mistakes in this area. Vivek, J.D. Vance, the people who are talking about the family. And so I believe this is the biggest sin. I did a monologue about this a couple months ago about how the United States government's greatest sin is the destruction, the systematic elimination of the black nuclear family. And I do think that's the biggest sin that our government has done, is they've destroyed the black nuclear family. But they've also, broadly speaking, the biggest sin our government and our culture broadly has committed is the devaluation and the systemic destruction and eradication of the nuclear family. And it's incentivized at so many levels of our culture, so many levels of our politics, encouraging divorce, feminism, the red pill, all these things. And now what this is manifesting in is what young people believe now is that it is culturally and societally disadvantageous for young people, young men and young women, for some combined, some different reasons, to start a family, to be a part of a family, to be a wife, to be a husband, to be a mother, to be a father. And I think this has been really a top-down approach that started with my parents' generation. Because I think Gen X, I was raised by 2 Gen Xers. I think Gen X was the first real, fashionable divorce culture that happened. I think it was still kind of taboo when the boomers did it, but it was crazy how many friends that I had with parents that were divorced. And especially, we're in the disability community because of my sister, and the amount of, the disability rate or the divorce rate for disabled families is above 85%. You can look that number up. And the divorce rate is above 50%, even though that's mixed or whatever. And I don't think a lot of that's true. But it's just it's just so common. And divorce is just one thing, but divorce is the, again, all conflict is a manifestation of not feeling heard, miscommunication, etc. And so, but if we fix the family, if we re-emphasize the family, if my generation of young people desire marriage, desire family, desire having kids, desire raising those kids, desire discipling those kids, desire being present for those kids and for each other, by the way, keeping the marriage first and foremost inside of the marriage. This will not only help sort out the problems we have with our culture, but it will also sort out the problems, a lot of the problems, I would argue, we have with the quote-unquote meaning and the quote-unquote purpose gap. Like, I love that phrase because I hate that phrase. But I think it's such an interesting thing to observe because the meaning and purpose is found in responsibility. Jordan Peterson got this right 10 years ago. And by the way, a lot of people like Jordan Peterson have gotten it right for thousands of years. Meaning and purpose is found in caring for other people. So when you look at our young people, my generation and the generation above me and below me, and see a bunch of, I don't feel like my life is meaning. I don't feel like my life has purpose. I don't know what to do with my life. Marry someone and make babies. You will find your meaning. You will find your purpose. Trust me. And I don't even have it. And I see it with a lot of my friends are married. A lot of my friends have kids. Like I had my two best friends from high school that I still talk to. They both had kids within the last year. And they're like, dude, you don't know what it is until you know what it is. I talk with, older folks who have kids that are my age or around my age. They see the exact same thing. So if we take the eyes off of, again, not the fruit of our broken social contract, but the root of our broken social contract, and we put our focus onto the root, onto the things that matter, the family being primary among them, Americans will be far better off and far happier than they currently are. Far happier than they currently are. Because again, happiness, meaning, purpose is found in caring for other people. It is found in responsibility. It is found in all of those things. And again, this is a quote-unquote controversial point, but this is the reality of the situation from everything that I've seen, everything that I've read. A society that is built off of, wait for it, strong, heterosexual, two-parent families who pass on their values, particularly Christian conservative types. That is what society is built off of. That's what it's always been built off of. Europe, Africa, Asia. The formula is undefeated. It is absolutely undefeated. And the interesting thing is that most of the demographic of this demographic, of people that I just mentioned, they all believe this to be true. They all know this is true. They all believe in the same thing. They all know it at a base level, even if they would be petrified to admit it in public. They all know that it's true. So, if we encourage that through family formation, through encouraging young people to couple up, get married, have kids, and if we put pressure on our institutions in the culture to put the family at the top pinnacle of all of this, and we pass it down, we encourage that for our friends, we encourage that for our, the people in our church, the people in our neighborhood, whatever, and we enforce that on our children to keep that same principle, that is how we ensure the American social contract for generations to come. That is how we make it happen for the long run. We will keep that because we've passed it down properly. So if we want America's social contract to heal, to renew, it must be passed down. And the way that we pass it down is by emphasizing to the highest point in society, there is nothing that can happen in America that would be better than the flourishing and the establishment of the American nuclear family. And if we do that, a lot of other things will be solved downstream. Lots of other things. Thank you for watching. Own the day, open your mind, and I'll see you next week.